They have centrifuges that were never installed, the whereabouts of which is unknown. They have a large stockpile of high enriched uranium, the whereabouts of which is unknown. And they have the potential to have built smaller centrifuge facilities and possibly weaponization work elsewhere, the whereabouts of which is
Mm.
unknown. So they're not operating from a standing start. And the purpose of another, even more deeply buried facility, not far from the Natanz, at a place called Kolan Gazlar, is unknown.
Question marks remain because of that leaked Pentagon assessment. We first mentioned it on last night's show, which said the Iranian program had only been set back by a few months. We also heard from the UN nuclear watchdog today saying that much of Iran's highly enriched uranium may have survived. Israel say, yes, the job has been done. This is the Israeli intelligence services. Of course, they would say that, and the US have doubled down again on what they feel was a very successful mission. What can we definitely say about the situation in Iran? Let's speak to Matthew Savill, Director of Military Sciences at RUSI, that's the Royal United Services Institute. Matthew, good evening again. Hello.
Good evening.
There has been so much today, back and forth, different nations, different groups of people, watchdogs, committees, etc., saying different things about this. What can we ascertain for sure about how successful, first of all, the United States were in their mission over the weekend to destroy the Fordo nuclear facility in Iran?
Well, I mean, there is really two lots of information there, which is what we can know publicly and what they might know in private. If we're talking specifically about the US strikes, which were aimed at Fordo and actually the other nuclear sites up at Isfahan and Natanz, it's a mixture. A lot of the sites up at Isfahan are above ground, and the imagery appears to show massive damage to that site, which had already been attacked previously. Now, we don't actually know the results of that, but if you can see the buildings that appear to have been destroyed, there's a pretty good guess of what that has done. And Isfahan has a number of functions, but one of the key ones is that that's where uranium that has been, if you like, refined is turned into uranium metal, which creates the core of an eventual nuclear weapon. Natanz was the site of the largest Iranian cascade of centrifuges that enrich the uranium. There's an above ground part of that. That also looks like it's been destroyed, and the IAEA has been able to monitor that. And then there was a below ground site, but not, reasonably well protected underground, but not as deep as Fordo. That appears to have been struck by the US, having previously been hit by the Israelis. It is inferred that it has suffered pretty significant damage. Fordo, we just don't know, because we're looking at some small entry holes on the top of a mountain. And it's reasonable to make assumptions that inside that mountain there's been considerable damage, but people don't really know, did they reach the centrifuge hall or detonate close enough to it to have damaged the sensitive equipment inside?
Yeah, that is the question. And of course, Israel went back to carry out further attacks, didn't they, on Fordo on Monday? When I asked their government spokesperson about that, he said it was just to fully destroy the entrance to the facility. Two Israeli officials also claimed that intelligence showed that Iran's stockpile of 60% and 20% enriched uranium was actually buried underneath the rubble of Isfahan and Fordo. I mean, we just don't know what the truth is. It's been widely reported otherwise that enriched uranium close to weapons grade was taken elsewhere. We don't know the truth of that situation. I mean, you've obviously given us a very clear assessment of what condition each of those sites are in. What can we say about Iran's nuclear threat now, Matthew?
Well, I mean, just on the enriched uranium, the IAEA did have access to that before all of this most recent bout. The majority of that was not stored at Fordo. It appears to have potentially been moved, but no one knows where. So I think that there is a little bit of, if you like, optimism bias in hoping that it's been moved to the site that was then struck. I think it's more likely that material that was being enriched inside Fordo hasn't been removed as well. But the IAEA, who are the people closest literally to it, don't know where that 400 kilograms is.
Okay.
What we can say is that across the full scope of the Iranian nuclear program, it has suffered significant damage and loss of people that I think the estimates are that it would take a couple of years of major effort and uninterrupted by further attacks to put it all back together. However, they aren't starting from scratch. They have centrifuges that were never installed, the whereabouts of which is unknown. They have a large stockpile of high enriched uranium, the whereabouts of which is unknown. And they have the potential to have built smaller centrifuge facilities and possibly weaponization work elsewhere, the whereabouts of which is unknown. So they're not operating from a standing start. And the purpose of another, even more deeply buried facility, not far from the Natanz, at a place called Kolan Gazlar, is unknown. So this is the uncertainty that both external experts, but also the Israeli and US intelligence community is grappling with.
Yeah, and this is why it is so important that Iran gets back round the table and signs some sort of agreement. And the US is brokering this on their intentions over nuclear facilities. That is why that work still needs to be done. And Donald Trump saying that the US will hold talks with Iran next week. Matthew, let me just touch on the UK's announcement today to expand our own nuclear deterrent with F-35A fighter jets carrying weapons. It's been described as the biggest expansion of the deterrent since the end of the Cold War. Just walk us through that. What does this mean? What are we getting here?
So we've always had, the core component throughout the Cold War of our nuclear deterrent was submarine launched ballistic missiles. For quite a while, we also had air-dropped free-fall bombs, first from the famous V-bomber force, and then right into the 90s, we had tornadoes that were equipped with nuclear bombs. Now, we gave those up at the time, largely as a cost-saving measure. What now seems to have happened is that we are getting back into what is known as operating dual-capable aircraft, which is that you have aircraft in your fleet, combat aircraft, and lots of Europeans have this, and they are capable of carrying small-ish nuclear weapons, which are usually held by the Americans, and then at a time of crisis, you can effectively be given these weapons by the US, and then they are intended for use on the battlefield, insofar as you use nuclear weapons on the battlefield. So these aren't intended to destroy Moscow or St. Petersburg. They're intended to be dropped on large, essentially Russian, probably, formations in the field.
Okay, thank you for spelling that out. There's the question of cost, but as I understand it, they are replacing an existing order. This is what James, one of our listeners, says. They are replacing an existing order for 12 F-35B aircraft. There's a saving because the F-35B is more expensive than these that are F-35A. I don't know if you can qualify that, Matthew, if that makes sense to you.
No, that is true. It's a slightly curious purchase because it's not clear whether we really need to do this and whether this is, this is a small force. What actually appears to be happening is that the UK is buying the F-35A in small numbers, but potentially more later on, because they are cheaper by maybe 15 to 20 million pounds each than the F-35B, and using it in the first instance for the training squadron. It just so happens that they could also make a contribution towards European nuclear capabilities. I suspect there'll be an interest in buying more of these down the line to expand the F-35A component of our F-35 force. The challenge that they will have is that you want to retain enough F-35Bs to have a big enough, a large enough volume to sustain the carrier strike component, because the F-35s can't fly off, the F-35As can't fly off the carriers, whilst you're building up this, in theory, cheaper force. There are lots of unanswered questions about what this looks like.
Yeah.
We need to swap these jets into our projected F-35 purchases, and there's a question of the timing of that,
Okay.
because we've already made a number of commitments.
Yeah, I'm going to have to leave it there for time, Matthew, but that's all fascinating. Thank you for educating us, me, particularly Director of Military Sciences at RUSI. Thank you for being with us.